It had been 3 years since I last saw Sarah. 3 long years of silence. I remember the day she walked out like it was yesterday, the door closing behind her, the sound of it reverberating through the empty house, leaving me with nothing but the weight of regret and confusion. That day, I thought I was losing everything, but in some ways, I had already lost her long before. At first, I didn't know how to handle the emptiness. I stayed in our house, in the same place where we had built our life together. I couldn't bring myself to leave it. It felt like if I left, it would mean I was truly giving up on us. But Sarah was gone. She didn't just leave physically. She had checked out of the relationship years earlier. I'd been blind to it, or maybe I just refused to see it. Our marriage hadn't always been like this. I remember when we first met. She was everything I thought I wanted. Smart, beautiful, adventurous. We moved in together after just 6 months, and it felt right. She made me laugh, and I made her feel safe. We had a future. At least, I thought we did. But somewhere along the way, things started to fray. The small moments, the ones that should have mattered, began slipping through our fingers. We got busy. We stopped talking. I worked late hours, and she started taking more and more trips with friends. Then came the silence, the kind that doesn't scream but whispers. I thought it was just the stress of life, but now I see it was a slow burn. After Sarah left, I found myself drowning in work, in alcohol, in anything that could fill the void. I tried dating again, tried to move on, but I never could. She had that hold on me, even when she was no longer around. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't understand it. The fact that she was with someone else didn't hurt the way I thought it would. I just felt nothing, hollow. The truth was, she hadn't been mine for a long time. But that didn't make the pain any easier to bear. Then one day, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Sarah. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. I didn't know what to feel. Surprised, angry, curious, all of it. I opened it, and her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Can we talk?" I sat there frozen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I had never expected her to reach out again. There had been no sign, no indication that she wanted to reconnect. It had been 3 years of complete radio silence. And yet, here she was, asking for a conversation. Was she sorry? Did she want closure? Or did she want to pick up where we left off? I wanted to ask her why, to make her explain herself, to finally get answers to the questions that had haunted me for years. But I didn't. Instead, I simply replied, "When?" Her response came quickly. "Tomorrow. Coffee?" I wasn't sure what I expected, but I wasn't ready for the rush of emotions that hit me when I saw her again. It had been 3 years, and she looked different. Older, more polished, like she had been living a life I hadn't been a part of. Her hair was shorter, and she wore a kind of confidence I hadn't seen in her before. When I walked into the cafe, she was already sitting at a table by the window, sipping a coffee with her fingers curled around the cup, like she was trying to hold on to something. She looked up as I approached, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. But it disappeared just as quickly. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but guarded. "Hey," I replied, sitting down across from her. I had no idea what to say. The silence between us stretched for a few seconds before she finally spoke. "I know this is strange, but I needed to see you. To explain." I stared at her, trying to make sense of it all. Was this an apology? Was she just looking for closure? Or was she trying to reopen old wounds? "Explain what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, glancing out the window for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. "I know I hurt you. I know I left without giving you a reason. But the truth is, I was never really here, even when I was. I was never the person you thought I was." Her words hit me hard, even though I had suspected something like this for a long time. I had never wanted to admit it, but I had always known on some level that Sarah wasn't really present in our relationship. But hearing her say it, out loud, made it all feel so final. "I was lost," she continued, her voice trembling slightly, "and I didn't know how to fix it. So, I just left. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell at her, to demand answers, but instead, I felt this strange sense of calm washing over me. Maybe it was relief, Or maybe it was just the fact that after all this time, I was finally hearing the truth. But I couldn't help but wonder, why now? Why reach out after all this time? What did she want from me? Why now? I asked, finally finding my voice. Why after 3 years? She looked at me, and for the first time since she sat down, I saw the faintest glimmer of something. Regret? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm tired of running. Maybe it's because I miss you. I don't know what it is. I just know that I needed to talk to you. To say everything I should have said before. Her words hung in the air, and I couldn't tell if she was being sincere or if she was just trying to ease her own guilt. But part of me wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that there was still something between us. But I also knew that I had changed. I had moved on, or at least I thought I had. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted from this conversation. I didn't know what I expected from her. All I knew was that after years of not hearing anything from her, finally hearing her voice again stirred something inside me. Something I couldn't quite place. We spent the next hour talking, or rather, she did most of the talking. She explained her reasons for leaving, how she had felt trapped, how she had never felt truly understood. I listened, but it was hard to shake the feeling that none of it mattered anymore. Whatever we had, it was gone. It was a version of us that no longer existed. But as I walked away from that cafe, I felt a strange sense of closure. I didn't feel angry anymore, but I also didn't feel like I wanted her back. Maybe it was because I had finally come to terms with everything. Or maybe it was because I had realized that the person I had once loved was no longer the person I needed. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Closure isn't always about getting all the answers. Sometimes, it's about letting go. After our meeting, everything felt quieter. I didn't know what I had expected, but it wasn't that. I thought I might walk away angry or emotional, wanting answers. Instead, I felt this strange peace that I couldn't really explain. Maybe it was the closure I had been waiting for without even knowing it. Maybe it was just the relief of not having to carry the weight of wondering why anymore. But no matter how much I tried to analyze it, I couldn't stop thinking about what Sarah had said. The weeks that followed were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. They were filled with this underlying restlessness. She had pulled the curtain back on our past, exposing things I hadn't wanted to face, and now I was stuck there, trying to reconcile it all. I told myself I was fine. I was. I went to work, I socialized with friends, and I stayed busy, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to her. But every night when I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying that conversation, hearing her voice in my head. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. My life had moved on, or so I thought. I had convinced myself that I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need the chaos, the emotional manipulation, the unspoken resentments. But now, here I was, doubting everything. And Sarah, God, she had that effect on me. It was like she was a ghost, lingering in the corners of my mind. It wasn't long before she reached out again. I was at work, staring at my computer screen when her name popped up on my phone. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. Maybe I just needed to hear her voice again, even though I knew better. Hey, I answered, my voice sounding hoarse, like I hadn't spoken in days. Hi, she replied, a bit hesitantly. I was hoping we could talk again. I know you probably don't want to, but I just wanted to check in. My stomach tightened. It had only been a few weeks since our meeting, and now she was calling again. What did she want? It was like I was being pulled back into something I was trying so hard to leave behind. Check in? I repeated, trying to keep my voice neutral. About what? I don't know, she said, the uncertainty clear in her tone. About everything. About us. I don't want things to end like this. My chest tightened. I could feel the old familiar pull, the one that made me want to fix things, even though I knew it was never that simple. Sarah, I started, my mind racing. I don't think we need to keep doing this. I don't think we need to keep talking. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her chewing on her words. I get it. I understand, she finally said, sounding so much more subdued than the confident woman I had seen in that cafe. But I don't know how to move forward without at least trying to make things right, even if it's just for us. The mention of making things right stung, as if there was something left to fix. But what was there to fix? We weren't the same people anymore. We couldn't go back to who we had been. I don't know what to tell you, I said, my voice becoming quieter. It's been so long. We're not the same anymore, Sarah. I'm not the same guy you left behind. I know, she whispered. I just didn't realize it until I was gone. And now I can't seem to shake the feeling that I owe it to us, to you, to do something about it. I wanted to tell her that there was nothing left to owe, that she had made her choices, and I had made mine. But part of me still wanted to believe in some kind of redemption, some chance that things could be different, even if I knew deep down that it was unlikely. I don't know if that's possible, I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. I really don't know if it is. We stayed on the phone for another 10 minutes, the conversation drifting to awkward silence. But even as we hung up, something was gnawing at me. What did she want from me? Why was she so insistent on trying to revive something that had been dead for so long? The days passed in a blur. I went through the motions of my life, working, seeing friends, trying not to think too much about Sarah. But the truth was, every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be her. Every time I saw a place we used to go, I thought about her, about the way she used to laugh, the way she would take my hand as if she was never going to let go. I could still feel the echo of her presence, even when she wasn't there. And then, one evening, she showed up at my door. Just like that. I hadn't expected it. I don't know why I hadn't. But there she was, standing in front of me, looking just like she had all those years ago. That same look of uncertainty in her eyes, mixed with something else. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was desperation. But I wasn't sure which one would hurt more. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, her voice breaking the silence between us. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to shut the door and walk away. I wanted to tell her that it was over, and that it had been over for a long time. But instead, I stood there for a few moments, frozen. Then I stepped aside and let her in. We didn't sit down immediately. There was too much air between us, too many things unsaid. So we stood there in my living room, neither of us quite knowing what to do. "Why are you here, Sarah?" I finally asked, my voice a little more fragile than I wanted it to be. She bit her lip, her eyes scanning the room like she was looking for something she couldn't quite find. "I don't know. I couldn't stop thinking about what we had, about what I left behind. I feel like I owe it to you, to both of us, to figure this out." I couldn't help but laugh, bitterly. "Figure it out? Sarah, it's been 3 years. You can't just walk in here and expect me to pretend like nothing happened. Like we didn't go through all that. Like you didn't leave." She flinched at the words, and for a moment, I saw a crack in her facade. The confident woman I had met in the cafe had vanished, and in her place was just someone who was broken, just like me. "I know I can't fix everything," she whispered, "but I had to try." And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't about fixing the past. It wasn't about undoing the hurt. It was about her trying to find peace. And maybe, just maybe, it was about me trying to do the same. But there were so many pieces between us, too many cracks, and I wasn't sure I was ready to pick them all up again. I stood there, looking at her, trying to process what she had just said. The weight of it hung in the air between us, heavy and thick. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, not in the way I expected. She wasn't even asking for a second chance, or for things to go back to the way they were. But it was clear she wanted something I wasn't sure I could give. "I'm not sure how to even begin with this," I said, breaking the silence. My mind was racing, the room feeling smaller with every second. I had so many questions, so many unresolved emotions bubbling under the surface. It felt like opening a door that had been locked for years, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to step through it. Sarah's eyes were searching mine, desperate for something, understanding, reassurance, maybe even just a small bit of closure. But I couldn't give that to her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I had to protect myself now. I had to remember why I let go in the first place. The pain of the past 3 years was still fresh in my mind, still raw. "I don't know if I can do this," I said quietly, feeling the weight of the words as they left my lips. "I don't know if I can just pick up where we left off, or pretend like everything's okay. You left me, Sarah. You walked away, and I had to learn how to live without you." She flinched, her face contorting in guilt. But she didn't look away. She wasn't going to back down this time. I could see it in her eyes. This was important to her. Maybe the most important thing in her life at that moment. I know, she said, her voice trembling. And I'm so sorry. I can't change that. I can't undo it. I just want you to know that I'm not the same person I was. And I know that doesn't mean anything to you. But I had to come here. I had to see you. I had to know if there was any chance, anything, of us figuring this out. I felt a surge of frustration building up inside me. Part of me wanted to shut her down, to tell her everything she wanted to hear so she would leave. But the other part of me was confused. What was I supposed to do with this? This apology, this sudden desire to fix things when so much had already been broken? You can't just show up and expect me to forgive you, I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended. You can't just decide that you want to fix everything after 3 years of silence. It doesn't work that way, Sarah. I know, she whispered, her shoulders slumping slightly. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to take me back. But I need to know if I can ever make things right with you. Even if it's just talking. Even if that's all it ever is. I felt my chest tighten. Talking. I hadn't wanted to talk about us in so long. I hadn't wanted to think about her in that way. But here we were, standing in the middle of my living room, trying to figure out how to move forward after everything that had happened. The past 3 years, the hurt, the confusion, the mess. It all came rushing back in an instant. And now, she was asking me to figure out how to fix it, to figure out if we could ever fix it. I don't know if we can, I said, my voice quieter now, more resigned. I don't know if I can even be in the same space with you, without feeling like I'm drowning in all the things we never said. You hurt me, Sarah. You broke me. And it wasn't just that you left. It was everything. The lies, the silence, the things you said and didn't say. It broke me. She took a step forward, her eyes filling with unshed tears. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to break you. I know I did. And I know that's something I can't undo. But I'm here now, and I want to show you that I've changed. That I'm not the same person who walked out on you. I could see it in her face, the raw emotion, the desperate need to be understood. It was painful to watch, but at the same time, I couldn't turn away. Part of me wanted to hold her, to tell her it was okay, to let it all go. But I couldn't. I knew better than that. I don't know if I can believe you, I said quietly, my voice cracking slightly. I don't know if I can trust you again. For a long time, there was nothing but silence between us. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't unbearable either. It was just heavy. We both knew we were standing on the edge of something, but neither of us knew what would happen if we stepped off. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. I don't expect you to trust me right now. I don't even expect you to want anything to do with me. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, that I regret leaving you. And if there's any chance at all, that we could find our way back to something, I'm willing to try. The words hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of them in my chest. What did she want from me? What was I supposed to do with that? She wasn't asking for a relationship. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She just wanted something. But I didn't know what that was. And I didn't know if I could give it to her. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. And I saw the woman I once loved, the woman who had broken my heart, standing there, vulnerable and unsure. She wasn't the person I remembered. She wasn't the woman who had walked out on me so easily. She had changed. But had I? Could we both change enough to find a way forward? I don't know, I said finally, my voice almost a whisper. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I don't know if I can open that door and let you in. Sarah nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. But there was a quiet acceptance in her gaze. She wasn't asking for more than I could give her. She wasn't demanding that I open up or forgive her right away. She was just there. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something. I didn't have to make a decision right then. I didn't have to fix everything in that moment. We were both lost in this, trying to find our way back to something we'd lost. But maybe we could take the first step, together. Or maybe, just maybe, we couldn't. And that was okay too. I don't know either, I said finally, but we'll figure it out. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sliver of hope. Not for a perfect ending, not for a fairy tale, but for the possibility of something real. Something that wasn't about fixing the past, but about finding a way forward, no matter how uncertain that path might be. It had been a week since Sarah left. A week that felt like a month, and yet, somehow, like a single blink. The days blurred together in a haze of uncertainty, and I couldn't seem to shake the memory of her standing there in my living room. Her apology, her tears, the raw, honest confession of regret. At first, I told myself it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the past, to rewrite the hurt she caused. But something about the way she looked at me, the way she hadn't backed down, the way she seemed so different from the woman I once knew, kept me up at night. Was I being too hard? Was I refusing to even entertain the idea that maybe she had changed? I found myself replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. I didn't want to admit it, but I was beginning to wonder if there was something there worth salvaging. I had always been stubborn, always told myself that I couldn't go back, that I was better off alone than stuck in the past. But here I was, questioning everything. The first night after she left, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, haunted by the words she'd said, the regret in her voice, the sincerity. It felt like a weight, a burden I wasn't sure how to carry. I had spent so much time pushing my feelings down, locking them away, that I didn't know what to do with them now. I didn't know if I could ever let her in again, but I also didn't know if I could continue pretending I didn't care. So, I did what anyone in my position would do. I called her. The moment the phone rang, my heart was in my throat. I didn't know what I was expecting, but when she picked up, I felt a sense of relief, mixed with an equal measure of anxiety. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft and cautious. It was clear we were both testing the waters. "I've been thinking," I started, pacing the kitchen. "I'm not saying everything's okay, but I don't know. I don't know if I can just let this go." What you said, it mattered. More than I thought it would. I heard her breath hitch on the other end of the line, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, finally, she spoke. "I never expected you to forgive me right away. I didn't even expect you to talk to me again, but I meant it. I'm not the person I was when I left, and I know that doesn't mean much to you right now, but it's the truth. I just want a chance. A real one." Her words hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of them, like an unspoken promise. There was a vulnerability in her voice that I hadn't heard in years, and it made me question everything. Was I really so certain I was better off without her? Or was my pride just too fragile to admit that I missed her? "I don't know what that looks like," I said honestly, leaning against the counter. "I don't know if I can just jump back into this. I can't pretend like everything's fine when it's not. But maybe we can take it slow. Figure out where we go from here." A small sigh of relief escaped her, and I could practically hear her nodding on the other end. "Slow is good. I'll take whatever you're willing to give me." We ended the call after a few more minutes, not having solved anything but, in some strange way, having come to an understanding. We weren't jumping into anything, but we had both acknowledged that there was something worth exploring. I wasn't sure where it would go, but I couldn't ignore the part of me that still cared for her. The next few days were a blur. I spent hours walking around the city, lost in thought. At first, I resisted the urge to call her again. I didn't want to be that person, desperate, clinging to something that was long gone. But every time I saw something that reminded me of her, our favorite coffee shop, a song we used to laugh at together, I found myself reaching for my phone, only to stop myself at the last second. It wasn't until the third day, when I got home from work, that I found a message from Sarah waiting for me. It was simple, but it cut through all the noise in my mind like a knife. "I miss you. I've been thinking a lot about us. I know I hurt you. I know I can't change the past, but I don't want to let it define us anymore. Can we meet?" I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. Her words were like a lifeline, but at the same time, they filled me with dread. Could I really sit down with her, face to face, and figure this out? Could I find a way to trust her again? After a long pause, I typed back, "Where?" She replied almost immediately, suggesting the same little park we used to visit all those years ago. The place where we first kissed, where we spent hours talking about our future, our dreams. It was the place where everything started, and now it felt like the place where everything might end, or begin again. I didn't know which one it would be. When I showed up at the park, the world seemed quieter than I remembered. The leaves were just starting to turn, the cool breeze making the branches sway gently overhead. It felt surreal, like stepping into a memory, only this time the past was a little more distant. The moment I spotted Sarah sitting on a bench near the lake, my heart did a strange flutter, but I didn't let it show. She was looking down, her hands folded nervously in her lap. I walked toward her, unsure of what to say, but she looked up at me with a soft smile that made everything feel a little less impossible. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, standing up as I got closer. "I almost didn't," I admitted, "but I'm here." And just like that, the silence between us didn't feel as heavy. It wasn't a promise of anything. There was no guarantee that we'd walk away from this with answers or with closure. But there was a shift, a quiet, tentative start to something that might or might not lead somewhere. And for the first time in a long time, I was willing to explore it. She motioned for me to sit beside her, and I did, not saying a word. We just sat there for a while, watching the water ripple in front of us, letting the silence fill in the gaps between everything we'd left unsaid. "I don't want to talk about the past," she said quietly after a long pause. "I don't want to go over everything I've done wrong. I just want to be here with you, right now, and see if we can figure out who we are now, together, or apart." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure what I was ready for. But in that moment, with her sitting next to me, I realized that this wasn't just about fixing what had been broken. It was about learning to walk forward, together or separately. And that was something I hadn't been able to do until now. "I think I'm willing to try," I said quietly, looking at her for the first time in a way that wasn't clouded by anger or fear. "I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm willing to try." And that was enough for me for now. The days that followed were a strange mix of familiarity and uncertainty. We saw each other more frequently than I had expected, but it wasn't the same. Nothing was the same. I found myself constantly looking for signs. Signs that things were truly different, that Sarah wasn't the same person who had left, and that I wasn't the same person who had been hurt by her. It wasn't easy. There were moments of awkwardness, moments where our conversations felt forced. But then there were moments that reminded me of why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. The way her eyes would light up when she talked about something she was passionate about, or the way her laugh filled up a room like nothing else. It was those little things that made me feel like we weren't completely lost to each other. We didn't dive into heavy conversations about our past right away. Instead, we spent time getting to know the versions of ourselves that existed now. It felt like we were two strangers trying to find a way back to something that used to make sense, but with all the history between us, it was impossible to forget the fractures. One evening, about 3 weeks after our first meeting at the park, we sat together at a little cafe we used to go to when we were younger. The same table, the same old quiet corner near the window. I couldn't believe how long it had been since we had shared a moment like this. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" she asked, stirring her coffee slowly, her eyes distant. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "How could I forget? You spent the entire time trying to convince me that you could make the best latte in the world, even though you were only 18 and had never even made coffee before." She laughed softly. "I thought I could. I was so convinced." "I think I still have that notebook you wrote down all the coffee recipes in," I said, remembering the little blue book she used to carry around, the one that had drawings of perfect lattes and coffee beans on every page. Her smile faltered just a little, and I could see the flash of nostalgia in her eyes. "I used to dream about opening a cafe, a little place just like this one. I thought that was what I wanted." "You didn't just think it," I said. "You talked about it nonstop. You even made me promise that I'd be your first customer." She shook her head, smiling with a bittersweet edge. "I guess things didn't turn out the way I thought they would." For a moment, we were both quiet. She'd said it like she was accepting the past, accepting the fact that she didn't have the life she had once imagined. I wasn't sure what it meant, or what I was supposed to say to that. But then she turned to me, her face serious. "I'm sorry, Nate, for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I need you to know that I've thought about it all. I've thought about the things I did wrong and how I hurt you." Her words hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of them. I didn't want to dwell on the past anymore. I didn't want to rehash the mistakes and the heartache. But I also knew that it wasn't just about moving on. It was about truly understanding each other. "I know," I said quietly, my voice soft. "I know, Sarah, but we don't need to keep talking about it. I think we both know where we stand." She nodded slowly, her eyes searching mine, looking for something. "So, what now?" I leaned forward, feeling a little more confident than I had before. "Now? We just keep moving forward. No pressure, no expectations. We take this one day at a time." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I wondered if that was enough. If that was the right answer. I wanted to believe it was, but there were still so many unanswered questions between us. And yet, in that moment, I realized that I wasn't looking for perfect answers. I wasn't even sure if we could find them. What mattered now was the willingness to keep trying, to keep showing up. We didn't need all the pieces of the puzzle right away, but if we were both willing to try, maybe, just maybe, we could figure it out together. The days that followed were less about finding immediate solutions and more about learning to be present. Sarah and I started doing small things together, things that didn't have the weight of our past hanging over them. We went to museums, walked through parks, and cooked dinner together. Nothing was extraordinary, but everything felt meaningful. It wasn't about rebuilding our old relationship. It was about building something new, something that didn't have to live up to any past version of us. One afternoon, while we were sitting on the couch, watching a movie we had watched 100 times before, she turned to me, her voice suddenly serious. "I want to ask you something," she said, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "Yeah." I turned toward her, sensing the shift in the air. "Do you think we can do this? Not just the day-to-day stuff, but, really, do you think we can have something again? Something more than what we've been building?" I had to think for a moment. This wasn't a question I had been expecting, but it was one I knew would come sooner or later. The truth was, I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know if we could have what we once had, or if we could ever be that same version of ourselves again. But I also knew that I didn't want to walk away from what we had now. "I think we can," I said slowly, my voice steady. "But I think we both need to be honest about what we want, and we can't rush it. We have to be okay with the uncertainty, the messiness of it all. If we're going to do this, we have to do it with our eyes wide open." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I think I'm okay with that." And for the first time in a long time, I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe we weren't broken beyond repair. Maybe we had the chance to build something different, something better, and something that could last. But for now, all we could do was continue down this uncertain path, one step at a time. The days that followed felt like we were walking on a tightrope, balancing between the past and the future. We weren't pretending things were perfect, but there was a strange kind of peace between us. Sarah had made it clear she was ready to face the things we'd buried, but it wasn't just about confronting the past anymore. It was about building something that could survive what we'd been through. I didn't expect it to be easy. Hell, I didn't even expect it to be smooth. But it was real. It was raw. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. One night, a few weeks after our conversation at the cafe, Sarah called me. Her voice sounded different, nervous, like she had something important to say. "Can you come over?" she asked. "I think we need to talk." When I arrived at her place, she was sitting on the couch, her face unreadable. She didn't meet my eyes right away, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air. "Sarah?" I said, my voice calm, but I could feel the weight of her silence. She looked up, and there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. A quiet, resigned honesty. "Nate, I think it's time we face the truth." My heart dropped. My first thought was that she was going to walk away. It wasn't the first time I had feared that. There had been too many moments in the past where I thought we were finally on solid ground, only for it to crumble again. I tried to steady myself, holding back the anxiety that threatened to creep in. "What truth?" She took a deep breath, the words clearly not easy for her to say. "I don't think we can go back to what we had. I want to move forward, but it's not going to be like before. I'm not the person I was, and I don't think you are either." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. Part of me wanted to argue, to try and fight for something we had lost, but another part knew she was right. We couldn't go back to what we were. Not exactly. I know, I said softly, trying to push through the knot in my throat, but I don't think that means we can't still have something real. Just different. I think we can still have something that's ours. She looked at me, searching my face for something. I wasn't sure what. Maybe the same thing I was searching for. A sign that this could still work. After a long silence, she nodded. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm willing to try. Are you? I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I am. I want to try. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't a clean slate. But that conversation, raw and painful as it was, felt like the first step towards something new. A new chapter, even if we weren't sure where it would lead. The next few months weren't without their challenges. There were days when I questioned whether we were making the right choice, moments when the weight of everything we'd been through almost broke us. But there were also good days, moments where we laughed like we used to, when we talked about everything and nothing, when I looked at her and realized that we could still build something if we chose to. And we did choose. One evening, as we sat together in the kitchen, cooking dinner, Sarah caught my eye, her expression softening as she spoke. You know, when we first met, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to love someone, how to really be there for them. I put down the knife I was holding and looked at her, surprised. Sarah, we were kids. We both made mistakes. Hell, I made my share too. She shook her head, her lips curving into a small smile. Yeah, but I don't think I realized what it meant to truly be vulnerable with someone. To trust them completely. I didn't know how to let someone in, and I didn't know how to let myself be seen. I took a step closer to her, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. I know, but we're figuring it out, right? Every day, we're figuring it out together. She nodded. Yeah, we are. And I believed it. It wasn't about pretending that everything was fine, or that the past didn't matter. It was about acknowledging the mess we'd made, and still deciding that we were worth fighting for. We were both different people than we had been before, but we could still be something new together. We didn't rush anything. We didn't promise that everything would be perfect, or that there wouldn't be days when things felt heavy. But we kept showing up. And sometimes, that's all you can do. 6 months later, on a cold winter night, Sarah and I found ourselves sitting on the porch of the house we'd bought together. A small, quiet place on the outskirts of town. The house wasn't perfect, and neither were we, but it was ours. Together. I looked over at Sarah, watching her breath fog up in the cold air, a small smile on her face. Do you think we've made it? I asked, unsure of how to phrase what I was feeling. She turned to me, her gaze steady. I think we've made it through the hardest part. The rest is just life. I smiled, the weight of the last year finally lifting. Maybe we hadn't fixed everything. Maybe there was still more to figure out. But I knew that we were on the same side, and that was enough. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid of what was to come.